Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Councillor Liz Clements, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this January 2022 meeting of the Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee of Birmingham City Council. We're meeting today informally via Microsoft Teams. So for members of the committee and officers, if we stick to the normal Teams etiquette that we've got, if you could keep your camera and microphone muted and turn the camera on when you want to speak. So just to let everybody know that this meeting is being webcast for live and subsequent broadcast, and you'll be able to view recordings on the council's YouTube channel. And if there's any members of the press or public watching, you can record and take photographs, except when there are confidential items. And today we don't have any such items on the agenda. Moving on then, are there any declarations of interest that pertain to items being discussed today on our agenda? Okay, not seeing any hands raised or people indicating, so I'll take that as no. And just then to ask Basima, as our committee manager, have we received any apologies for today's meeting, please?
I've not received any apologies, Chair.
Okay, so no apologies received to date. So yeah, welcome to all the members of the committee joining us today and the officers who'll be presenting. So I think then let's move on then to our first substantive item, and I'd like to welcome Mark Wollstonecroft, who's going to be talking to us on progress with the development of the clean air strategy for Birmingham. So Mark, over to you.
Afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, members. Hopefully you can see me all right. Yeah, this is an update on where the clean air strategy has got to at this point in time, and the good news, Chair and members, is that we're almost there. The strategy, as you'll probably recall, has been developed to help the council deal with air quality issues, and this both supplements the work that's done under various regulatory regimes such as the local air quality management regime, and also major projects such as the clean air zone. But it also is there to support air quality agendas that sit outside of the council's legal duties. Now, there has been a strong desire across the council, and this is encapsulated within the strategy to ensure that air quality is considered across the wider city, and not only in those areas where we know that air quality is a problem, so potentially where it's above the legal limits. In effect, this allows the council to consider air quality where the legal limits are not being breached, but also where air quality improvements would have a clear benefit to individual citizens and also to local communities. And I suppose on that point, it is important to remember that most pollutants have no health threshold, so any reduction in levels will be of benefit. This also allows the council to focus on pollutants for which it does not yet have any legal duty, and at present the primary pollutant to which this would refer would be fine particulate matter, also known as PM2.5. The strategy also links into the council's other strategies and duties around carbon reduction, and it does seek to support those strategies such as, for instance, the Route to Zero programme. In terms of the development of the strategy, it's gone through a public consultation phase during 2019, and the responses that were generated from that consultation have been incorporated into the strategy, and they have helped us to review the various pledges that we initially put forward. So responses to the consultation elicited a desire for a stronger link between air quality and transport policies, and in response we have combined the planning and highway policies into one pledge, because they do link very neatly together. There was also a desire for more information around the incoming clean air zone. At the time it was incoming. Obviously it's now gone live, and this was considered in the relevant CAS pledge, with the responses from the consultation feeding into and helping to shape the messaging in the run up to the launch of the clean air zone, and the information that is contained within the pledge in the clean air strategy is still relevant post launch. So all of the various signposting to information is still useful and still relevant to citizens. Respondents also wanted us to ensure that the most vulnerable and less able were considered within the strategy, and this has resulted in a new pledge on inclusivity and protecting the vulnerable. And finally, there was a desire to ensure that our pledge focused on schools was stronger, and this has been amended appropriately to reflect those comments. Now, it's worth mentioning that the amended draft version was circulated internally for comment, and following that process, it has been moved now to final design in readiness for publication. I must apologise to you, Chair. I was hoping to have a worked up version to share with committee, but due to pressures on the services, regrettably, I could only share the version that was sent to design and print at the time. And I do acknowledge that there are some typos and very minor amends which will be remedied at the design stage. In terms of the development of the strategy, it has been hindered somewhat by the pandemic. I know you've been asking for this, and your committee have been asking for this for quite a period. And like I said, the pandemic regrettably pushed the publication date back. But in some ways, it has also given us time to refine aspects of the document. And this has resulted in the inclusion of a community engagement process, which we are terming a suggestion box. And this is put forward as another action. So instead of the 7 actions, there will be 8 actions. And this will be an ongoing process through the Breeds Board, and it should allow citizen suggestions to be reviewed and characterised into common themes, and ultimately to generate projects under the strategy or potentially be considered for new pledges when the strategy is reviewed. And on that point, at present, it is anticipated that the strategy will be reviewed every 12 months, and this will be confirmed via a progress or status report, which we will produce around 6 months after launch. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of where we are with regard to the strategy and a general overview of the of what the strategy contains. I think at this point, if you don't mind, Chair, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Peter McIntosh, and he will give a short update on the priorities within the strategy.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, because we had the papers in advance. I'm sure everyone's ready, but I think it would be good for people to understand the structure, around the pledges, and what you're going to do to promote them as well. So yeah, over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Chair, and hello, councillors. Can you see me okay?
Yeah, I can see and hear you clearly.
Fantastic. So the Clean Air Strategy is divided into basically 3 sections. You have the priorities, you have the pledges, we've also got the actions. The priorities, there are 5 of these. One is to improve the fleet. So this is actually the fleet composition of vehicles that are travelling around our city. The Clean Air Zone, for example, is a good way of getting rid of, discouraging the more polluting vehicles from travelling around the city. But it's also trying to improve it in the way of active travel as well. There's improved the flow of traffic. This is not just for diesel vehicles or petrol vehicles, but it's also for active travel like cycling, etc. It's also to reduce the volume of traffic, which is priority number 3. So this is the total volume of private vehicles, and trying to encourage things like more active travel, but also more public transport. We've got reduce the exposure of air pollution. So this is actually reducing the sources of air pollution and people's exposure to it. And this comes in numerous forms, with regulation from government legislation and how that is implemented at a local level, but also how we can actually design the city through distances between the road edge and also the highway and the facade of somebody's property. So the more distance there is between the two, there's actually more dispersion that occurs, so pollution levels are less at somebody's property where they're actually breathing them in. And we've also got the priority of empower behaviour change. So this is overall of how can we actually encourage people to be empowered to actually change their behaviour to be less polluting overall. These priorities we're going to be using to guide our comments for things like highways projects, but they can also be used for any other sort of schemes, like a scheme for working from home or something like that. And it's not just for the council. They could potentially be used for any sort of project that comes up, and seeing how they could actually align or benefit from these priorities, and seeing how these things can be achieved or built upon. With regard to the pledges, we've got the collaboration, we've got the air quality for schools, we've got inclusivity and protecting the vulnerable, we've got planning for the future, we've got the clean air zone, and we've also got measuring progress. These are outlined to actually just give a general overview of each of the areas which we really need to tackle in the way of bringing it all together. It's like planning for the future, it's bringing together highways and also the planning policy side of things, as Mark indicated in his comments earlier. And then also we have the strategy actions. So these are the things that we want to work on throughout the year to actually build on and show improvement in these particular areas, such as the clean air zone, which is up and running now. We've got the idea of a public suggestion box, so we can actually have people feeding straight into the air quality clean air strategy with ideas for future updates, so we can actually listen to people's views and capture their ideas. We've got access to data, so we're looking at more sort of ways of sharing our data. At the moment, we've got birminghamAirQuality.co.uk, which has got all our air quality data there, and we're looking to augment that with other ways to actually share things like the data from the clean air zone and seeing how that can actually be more accessible. We've got increased air quality monitoring generally across the board. So recently we've installed 6 new air quality stations around the city centre, and we're also looking for more air quality monitoring with the tranches of the diffusion tubes across the city. We're also got schools air quality monitoring and awareness. We're looking at ways to increase that. We've got a non-road mobile machinery action there. So this is looking at things like diesel generators or any other point source of air pollution which is not related to a vehicle, a moving piece of machinery. We've got an action there for wood burners and fireworks to raise public awareness of that. And we've also got an anti-idling campaign. Some of these actions like wood burners and fireworks and anti-idling campaign, they might be quite small scale to begin with, but over the years, and we hope to build on these things. So these actions may not be completely completed, but they're a guiding thing so we can actually start to build on it year on year to actually show a direction of travel of which way we're going to improve air quality across the board. So that's all from me, I believe. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Peter and Mark, and that's very clear presentation of the of the emerging strategy. And I was looking at it over the weekend and again yesterday, and I very much like the way that it's structured. And the beginning of it, it's got a couple of inspirational paragraphs urging people to imagine Birmingham where air pollution is a thing of the past. And where people have good options for walking and cycling in safety, a reliable, extensive public transport network, and that we're doing a massive campaigning to make people aware of the air quality impacts of things like wood burners or bonfires and things like that, and all sorts of other sources of pollution. I suppose the question really for us as scrutiny members is that is there enough in this strategy to deliver that vision at the beginning, which is absolutely inspirational, but is obviously some distance from where we are at the moment. So one of the things that I was thinking about, where you list the partners, and some of the ways that they can be involved. But as you know, this committee has taken an active interest in what's going on at New Street Station, for example. And as we move into the delivery of this strategy, what influence do we have over Network Rail and the train operating companies to make sure that they are delivering on that action plan?
Shall I respond to that, Chair?
Yeah.
I've been to your committee a number of times where New Street Station has been discussed. And whilst it's not inherently captured within the clean air strategy at this point in time, it is something that could potentially be included at a future date. At the moment, the New Street Station is that the legislation around it isn't something that falls within our particular remit. It comes under the rail franchising from government, and we know that New Street Station, our Network Rail, I should say, are working are lobbying government to improve the electrification of the fleet, because that's going to be potentially the big change. What we are looking to do, and Pete alluded to it in the comments when he did his part of the presentation, and that is around the air quality monitoring. One thing that we are conscious of is that the air quality at New Street Station, when the fans are blowing, effectively it gets blown out in the city. It's not mitigated in any way. It's just blown out into the wider city, and as such, it disperses. But what we don't really know is whether, what degree of impact that has on the streets surrounding the station. So Pete mentioned that we have a number of tranches of additional diffusion tube monitoring that we want to do under the air quality action plan, and that's we're also looking to include the area around New Street Station under that. So that kind of links into the action around and the pledge around additional monitoring, but also technically it is a legal duty, and it is something that we are looking at. And if there is an evidence base that it is actually contributing to the increased air pollution at that point, then that's something we'll have to look at legally through the air quality action plan. So there is a link there through to our regulatory duties, and also maybe some of the additional monitoring that we're including that's not necessarily diffusion tubes. So maybe an indicative sensor, we could potentially use one or more of them around that area, but that depends inherently on the situation when we do some initial monitoring. So there are things that we are doing with regards to New Street Station, as well as keeping tabs on it through the actions of your committee, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I can see Councillor Huxtable Tim wants to come in, so I'll bring him in shortly. But I just wanted to ask you a couple of other things. Since you've done the bulk of the work on this strategy, obviously the Environment Act has been passed, and we know that the government, I think it's got till October to set new standards. And I'd very much hope that they'd set the standards that are in line with the new World Health Organization standards. But does that Environment Act, does it have any implications for this strategy? Will you have to do any further amendments in the light of that new legislation? And then also, I'm just aware, because of the work that I'm doing on various combined authority committees, that there are also new duties for the combined authority in relation to air quality, and a notion of air quality partners for the CA. So how are we feeding into that work? And do you think an air quality strategy across the wider West Midlands CA region would add value? And I'm asking that obviously because things like particulate matter, they won't just stay within the council boundaries, will they? So you could just give me quick responses on that, and then I'll bring in Councillor Huxtable.
Yeah, of course, Chair. The Environment Act it'll probably sit above the strategy in a sense, because it will be whatever comes out of that will be a legal duty on the council. And at the moment, it's not clear exactly what levels are going to be set, and whether any of them are going to be translated to local authorities. The one that really springs to mind is PM 2.5. I very much doubt that they're going to shift the legal limits around nitrogen dioxide. So effectively, it will be potentially PM 2.5 that could change. With regards to the work of the CA, we are working alongside the CA around a regional clean air strategy, and some of the work that we've some of the engagement that we've been doing is trying to promote that closer working, because that's something as well that is alluded to within the Environment Act, around closer working between metropolitan authorities and combined authorities. So effectively, there will potentially be closer working at a point in the future, which is not necessarily a bad thing, given that the combined authority encompasses the 7 councils within the West Midlands area.
Absolutely, Mark. I think this is a classic issue where we're going to achieve more by working as the 7 authorities across the region to tackle this problem, which is a threat to everyone's life in the conurbation and in the surrounding counties. Tim, you've been very patient, so now over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got several questions. The first one is about trains, because we've talked about this previously. New Street is not the only train station in Birmingham City Centre. We also have Moore Street, and we also have Snow Hill. And you can't electrify the trains coming into Moore Street and Snow Hill. They are diesel trains only. There's no electric lines. So given the pernicious effects of diesel pollutants in the atmosphere, can we also have some additional pressure on the train operators in terms of Moore Street and Snow Hill, given that Network Rail don't actually operate either station, as I understand it? One's operated by West Midlands Trains and the other is operated by Chiltern. So can we not forget about those two stations and the diesel that gets shooed out into the atmosphere from those two stations? That's point one. Point two is I've noticed in Solihull, where we got the school streets pilot idea from, that they have created mini school clean air zones. And as I said at council last week, why can we not incorporate school clean air zones as an integral part of school streets and safe routes to school schemes, etc., and actually work together from a school safety, road safety, pedestrian safety, but also air quality perspective simultaneously, and working with the safer travel team? And finally, have we done any further research into the amount of pollution along the ring road and on the edges of the ring road since the introduction of the clear air zone? Because this is one fear I've always had. If you're encouraging, in inverted commas, more vehicles to use the ring road so as not to be charged, if you're preventing them through charging coming into the city centre, what effects from an air quality perspective have there been on the ring road and the neighbourhoods on the side of the ring road not within the clear air zone? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tim, for your questions. And it's over to Mark then for a response on those three questions that Tim's raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Huxtable, for those questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Some of them do actually sit better with other colleagues, but I'll do my best to give you an answer as far as I can. With regards to the trains at Moore Street and Snow Hill, I recall that we have done, I can't remember if I brought it to your committee, Chair, but we have done some monitoring around the train stations, or rather we've looked at the monitoring network that we've got and compared it to the other train stations in the city centre to see whether there was a potential for problems. I suppose in some ways, much like there is a potential at New Street, although given that New Street's enclosed and there are a number of exit points to atmosphere, shall I say, I don't think that these share the same. My recollection of that data was that the air quality levels around there were more dictated by local traffic than they were by the trains themselves, or by the operations at the stations. That being said, I would be happy to revisit that data and share that with yourself, Councillor, and obviously with the committee members, seeing as the question has arisen at this committee. And if that generates the need for some additional monitoring, then that is something that we can certainly look at. I guess what I'm angling to here is I need to revisit the data before I can give you a more comprehensive answer. Did you want to come back on that, Chair?
Well, just to say that I think it would be good to see the data, because I know that Tim's asked this question a number of times, and I think it would be of interest to all of us, but particularly Councillor Huxtable. So thank you for that offer.
Okay. On the School Streets programme, if I understand the question correctly, Councillor, why can we not incorporate mini clean air zones in the School Streets programme? My understanding of the School Streets programme is that they don't have clean air zones, but obviously they do restrict the use of the streets at certain times of the day, ostensibly when it's the drop off and pick up of the in before and after the schools open and close, which in some ways is almost like a clean air zone. It's far better to restrict vehicles going down the streets than it is to restrict them in total rather than it is to restrict them by any Euro standard, for instance, because then obviously you still have some vehicles going down there. That being said, I'm trying to give an answer on this, and I'm not entirely sure. And I need to link back to the Safer Travel team. I'll just ask Pete if he's got any insight, or if he wants to come in on that particular question, if he's got anything that he can have that can inform the answer to that.
Great.
There's not much I can really add to that. So thanks, Mark, for summarising it really well. As I understand it, the School Streets programme basically does act like a mini clean air zone. It's just the terminology for it is slightly different in the way it operates. But like Mark suggested, we'll ask colleagues about that to investigate any further actions that they could take or how that could be developed further.
Before you get to the final question that Tim asked, which was about pollution levels on the ring road outside the CAS zone, can I just ask you just a supplement? Sorry, Tim, it's just a supplementary question that I've got, which relates to schools. In the section which sets out the pledges for schools, there's a bullet point that says, clean air monitoring programme for schools, and what is that going to consist of? Because I'm thinking, when we've discussed this before, we talked about some of the innovations that are going on in other areas, like in Oxford, where they've got each school with a diffusion tube, and they've actually turned it into a science project for Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2. I can't remember exactly which part of the curriculum it is, but it's getting the kids involved in looking at air pollution as an issue that affects their lives, and getting them involved in the monitoring. And are we going to do something like that? And is there some allocated budget for activities like that?
And if I could ask a supplementary as well, Chair, I posted in the chat function some school clean air zone banners launched by the RAC to encourage drivers to turn off their engines, which is an essential part of the clean air zone. And these are the banners that I've seen on railings outside schools in Solihull in terms of the creation of mini clean air zones, because my criticism of the clear air zone in Birmingham is that it's focused on the city centre. The whole of Birmingham wants clean air. As a parent, I want clean air around the schools my children go to. And why are we not doing more outside of the city centre? And this would be a good start and fit in very well with the no idling, turn off your engine agenda outside of schools, which, as I say, they do in other local authorities.
Absolutely. In fact, I've seen, actually, I think it's Queensbridge School, I've seen shared on social media a banner that they've got pinned to the railings outside the main campus of the school, alerting parents about the dangers of air pollution and the need to turn off engines. So, Mark, if you could just come back on what Tim's just talked about in relation to the RAC campaign.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very quickly, Chair. I think this is one we're going to have to take away, Councillor, because it does link in with a number of the strands within the clean air strategy, especially around no idling and the pledge around the schools. There's two things there that it's covering, so it may be something that we can raise with the relevant officers as to whether it is something that can be taken forward. So if you can bear with me, I suppose, in that sense, and let me have the conversation with colleagues, and it may be something that that they are able to take forward.
That's great. Thank you very much. And if you could come back then to Tim's final question, which is about the levels of pollution on the ring road outside the CAS.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, as Pete's indicated in his presentation, as part of the increased monitoring, we have got 6 more air quality monitoring stations, and 5 of them are based on the ring road itself. So we are looking at the ring road under greater scrutiny, and they are not diffusion tubes, they are chemiluminescent analyzers, so they are reference grade instruments. So that will give us a good understanding as to what the pollution's like at those stretches of the ring road, and obviously supplement our existing data. Part of the Clean Air Zone work is will involve doing a 6-monthly and a 12-monthly report on how the network's responding to the Clean Air Zone and how that's translating into air quality compliance. So this will also look to consider the impact of displacement as well. So we will be looking at the areas on the edge of the Clean Air Zone to see if there has been any impact and to see whether that's translated into any shift in pollutant concentrations. Given the inference from Councillor Huxtable's question, the suggestion is that there has been more traffic and that there has been more pollution as a consequence. And maybe this is something that we can consider through the additional monitoring that we are looking at introducing, whether that's through the diffusion tubes or indicative sensors, and as part of the potential suggestion box through the clean air strategy, that if citizens are concerned about any particular area of the city, and if that is, say, around the clean air zone, then that's something that we can potentially focus on and have a look at it, because at the end of the day, the citizens are the ones who know what the traffic is like in their area better than anybody else. So we can take that anecdotal evidence and translate it into actual data, be that traffic counts or monitoring data, so the concentration. So yeah, that's what I would say in response to that. Pete, Chair, Pete, do you want to come in on anything about that? Because I know you're heavily involved in the clean air zone as well.
Thanks, Mark. No, I think you summarised it very well. At the moment, I am looking through the data for the last 6 months for the clean air zone and doing some preliminary analysis with a view to actually produce the report very soon. I can't quite give a date on at the moment. We're also working with the University of Birmingham to analyse the data. There are some interesting things that we've discovered which we need to iron out, talk about with them before we can present any results, because I don't want to provide you with anything at the moment which is liable to change and mislead you.
Thanks very much. I mean, that whole issue, I think, will be something that we'll come back to in the context of updates on the clean air zone and its efficacy, really, because we need to know that it's actually delivering the results that that we're intended for it, both in the city centre and then on the periphery. But you mentioned at the beginning, Mark, that this is a pre-print version of the final draft of the strategy. So obviously, quite a big deal is made in the document about asking members of the public to think about their pledges and to actually make a pledge to improve air quality. And you've referenced the suggestions box, which will be a way of actively seeking ideas from our citizens. So I'm assuming when the final design and print job is done, that will all be highlighted and flagged up in the graphic design, and there'll be easy ways for people to send in their pledges, and access the suggestions box. So can you just tell us what's planned there in terms of marketing this?
Pete, do you want to come in on that one?
Thanks, Mark. With the public suggestion box, we were really hoping to actually have this sort of finalised by this point. But after discussing it with colleagues internally, there are a number of issues of how this should be dealt with, about data capture, about people's opinions of it, how where these ideas are coming from via schools, businesses. So we've actually had to roll back on this very slightly at the moment and not actually include it in the actual text, but it's actually one of the actions. We're really determined, and we will get it up and running, hopefully by Clean Air Day in June, so we can actually promote it then and actually have people feeding straight into the suggestion box at that point, along with a raft of other things we're hoping to release around Clean Air Day. I think it's about the 16th of June. It's the Thursday of that week anyway. That is our aim, to get everything up and running by that point. That's good, because I think it's a really good, it's a really good idea. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it, in quite, sort of high profile way. And I'd hope by Clean Air Day, or on Clean Air Day, that we're doing something very eye catching, just to get people aware of this. Because
for example, I get queries from constituents about the impact of wood burners. Again, that's an issue where I'd like to be some awareness raising and a public campaign on that, because they are seem to be very popular in a number of areas of the city, but the impact on air quality, I think is not good.
Indeed, I completely agree. And the way I see the public awareness campaigns falling through the year is focused around Clean Air Day in June, but also have one around sort of bonfire night early November, because that's another big impact, and that's where you can tackle things like fireworks and also wood burners use. We also want a way of just actually having a schedule of all these things throughout the year, with drip feeding of lots of different ideas of things that are going on throughout the year through a public awareness campaign, but also big hits such as Clean Air Day and also Bonfire Night, just to raise the overall profile of what's going on. But we also, with the summary reports such as the Clean Air Zone one, or the summary of the strategy one, which we're going to be producing and updating it on the website, is trying to get the level of engagement going through different community groups of what they are doing, and they can feed back to us, which leads back to the original point about the strategy and the suggestion box, of how much of that suggestion box is just ideas or feeding back of stories which are going on. There's a whole bit of thinking that we need to do to launch this properly, to capture everybody's views and opinions on it. There's so many good ideas which are going on within Birmingham itself, but also the rest of the UK. There's all sorts of ideas which are coming up using new technologies, and we want a system which can capture all of that.
Yeah, I think a personal plea from me would be that when we come to Clean Air Day, which is the 16th of June, as one Kerry Saunders has just pointed out in the chat, it would be good to have some sort of campaign activities on that day that link into active travel and walking and cycling. Because I think last year there was a display of Euro 6 compliant diesel cars outside New Street, and the point of that was to flag up the clean air zone, which is obviously crucial for our whole strategy on clean air. But as your document points out, we need to imagine a Birmingham in the future where people can walk and cycle and use public transport, and that using their car isn't the thing that they have to sort of rely on as a first choice because there's no other alternative. So I think we need to have some creative thinking. And just a final question to you, as particularly to Mark, as you're with us today. I noticed that on Friday in London, the air quality that was so poor that there was a major alert. And bizarrely, the advice to residents in London was to not go out or do physical exercise, rather than telling people not to use their cars. So I was just curious, what is the system for air quality alerts of that kind? And when was the last time that we had a similar alert in Birmingham or the wider West Midlands?
The alerts come out from DEFRA based on what they know about pollution at that point in time and what bodies actually predicted. So they're the ones who would put the alerts out. The last time there was one in Birmingham, oh good grief, Chair. I can't think when that was. I'm not aware of a specific one for Birmingham or the West Midlands region. However, what tends to happen is we get the incidents coming over from the continent, so stubble burning in Eastern Europe, or maybe Saharan dust being blown across, and you tend to see it propagating up from the southeast and stretching into the Midlands, and sometimes it goes a bit further. So they tend to be the incidents where we get the alerts. But I can't recall one like what happened in London on Friday, which was very centralised on central London. And as you looked at the DEFRA map, you could see the colours shifting as it moved out. And obviously it didn't stretch really beyond the home counties, so we weren't affected. But yeah, most of ours tend to be more regional stroke national ones rather than local ones.
Well, I suppose the fact that we've not had one is in itself something to be cheerful about, because it did seem fairly extreme in London on Friday. But thanks for explaining that. And Peter's just put into the Teams chat for members the link to the relevant page on the DEFRA website. Is that right, Peter?
Indeed,
that's
the UK DEFRA.gov.uk site. That's got the air pollution warning system and predictions on there. It's also got all the details of the health advice, which is promoted when there is an exceedance of the levels on that scale. Just to point out, the UK air quality index is much higher than the local one. so where levels have to be horrendously high for it to actually activate. With regards to the London one, that was back on Friday last week, and that was due to very high pressure, which was over the whole of the UK. If you remember, it was a very foggy day for the whole of the UK with the mist around. So it basically stopped anything moving in the atmosphere. All the cars and vehicles travelling around London were just contributing to that, and it pushed it up to the highest level I think they've ever recorded. So it was really bad for London. We do get sporadic ones which do come over Birmingham, but at a lot lower levels, which haven't actually instigated a warning of this level. I would also say it was the first time that I saw the pollution level in the warning system being advertised on the national weather forecast. It doesn't normally appear there at all. And unlike with the pollen count, you always see the pollen count in the weather forecast, but you never actually see the national pollution levels. And to be honest, these ones are actually more important to show. So it's a question of why don't they appear there. This is something which I'm keen to do myself, is trying to encourage local weather forecasts to actually include these levels there. So again, this is part of the public awareness campaigning that we can do throughout the year to actually see if we can encourage this kind of engagement with the systems that we've got and the data that we can present.
That's fascinating. I think the idea of having it with local weather forecasts is a really good one. So I hope you will push that, and I think it ought to be combined with really asking people to consider whether they need to use their cars on that day. But again, that's something which is part of the awareness campaigning, isn't it? Okay, I can't see any more questions or raised hands from members of the committee. So I'd like to thank Mark and Peter for coming and talking to us about the clean air strategy. And we all really look forward to seeing it published and to see the promotional activities. And yes, let's have something high profile for Clean Air Day and get people on board with making their own individual pledges for themselves and their families. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Yeah.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm just scrolling back to my agenda. So our next item is update on the renegotiation of the highways management and maintenance PFI contracts, and we've got Kevin Hicks, Dominic DeBecci, and Clive Betts with us here to talk today to talk to us about this. So I'll hand over to Kevin to introduce this item then.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Chair, and just to absolute completeness, Happy New Year to everybody. That's probably the last one I'll do. You haven't got Dom here today, I'm afraid. Dom,
oh, right, sorry.
Dom's not in today. It is a rare presentation on a PFI not to have Dom here. I understand that, but yeah, Dom's not in today, unfortunately. But you do have the double act of Hicks and Betts. So Clive Betts on the screen there. Clive's our PFI procurement manager. Is key, obviously, to this particular subject. We've got a very short presentation, Chair, only about half a dozen slides that me and Clive will share between us. Clive will put it on the screen now. I'll lead off, and then just let Clive finish it off in terms of where we are on the procurement of the PFI.
That's great. You can tell Dom his ears should be burning, but in a good way, because we identify him completely with this topic. So anyway, I hope he has a good day off. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead then, Clive.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'll just try and share my screen now. So hopefully you should be able to see that screen there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Clive. So I think introduction's already done. So as I say, it's very short. We've only got a half dozen slides. As I say, I'll give it some introduction and context, and then Clive will give us some detail about where we are at the moment and where we're going on the journey of getting the contract re-procured. So next slide then, Clive. We'll just go through some of the context and introductions. Just for clarity and reminding everybody, we came to committee on 15th of December last year to cover. We'd just been to cabinet at the time on where we were going. On the 14th of December, we'd had a decision there on the re-procurement of the contract going forward. So we updated on the 15th of December for this committee purely on the basis of where we were on what we call the investment works programme. So that's the capital programme on footways and carriageways that you all know as members. So today's session is and presentation is just to look at the other aspect of it, which is what we took to Cabinet on the 14th of December, which is where we're going in terms of the procurement. So and what we'll try to cover today between myself and Clive is just where we are in the interim services that's being currently delivered through Kears, the procurement timeline for re-procuring the contract on a PFI basis, and very loosely what the future shape of that contract is going to look like going forward. I think, again, because as we've had many sessions with scrutiny previously where we've had those in private session and been able to open up on some of the more sort of commercially sensitive side of things, obviously because we're in albeit it's an informal meeting, but it's in the public domain, we are entering into a live procurement. What we've got here today is obviously doesn't contain any of that sort of commercially sensitive material, but if members do want to refer to the 14th of December Cabinet report, there is a section in there on the exempt information where there's far more details that can be looked at and analysed by members. And again, any questions any members have got on that, if they do want to refer back to that Cabinet report, by all means let me know, and I'll myself, Dom and Clive will do the best to answer any queries or comments you've got on that element of the re-procurement. So yeah, next slide then, Clive. Yeah, so just as a reminder, because many members on this call have been through this before, the PFI contract that we have is between us and an entity called the Birmingham Highways Limited, and that's the special purpose vehicle that's created for the purpose of having a PFI structure, and it's BHL, Birmingham Highways Limited, that's actually re-procuring. So the procurement is between BHL and what's known as the service provider. So it was previously Amy, it's currently Kears, and going forward on re-procurement, that subcontractor will be I say procured directly by BHL. And as we'll go on to the next slide, there's some reasons why we recognise that it's necessary to change the contract, and we'll touch on things like affordability of the project shortly. But sorry, Clive, just go back. Yeah, thanks. But other aspects of why we know it's necessary to change the contract has been the lessons learned from the previous experience with Amy. Obviously, there were challenges and difficulties with that, and for that reason, we know that contract between ourselves and BHL as the SPV needs to change to accommodate some of those changes, and say some of the stuff we'll talk about in the next slide. But the services in the interim are being provided by Kears, as we mentioned, and Clive will talk a bit more about the range of those services later on in the presentation. And it is also important to note that the DFT, as the sponsoring government department for the project, have ensured that in order for us to, when we go through the re-procurement exercise, that the retention of the £50 million per annum PFI grant that we get is going to be subject to approval of a number of business cases. The first of which we put in on the 6th of June, I think it was, might be the 8th of June actually last year, which was called the Strategic Outline Business Case. That got approved, and then we put the Outline Business Case into DFT on the 6th of December. And that decision on that business case is due from the Department for Transport's Investment Committee next Monday. So we're hoping for a positive approval for that. We're anticipating a positive response to that and approval of that business case, but we'll find that out next Monday when it goes to their investment committee. Okay, Clive, next slide then. So yeah, just touched on a few of the challenges and the reasons for perhaps, again, why we've got to look at potential changes to the contract. I mentioned affordability, and what we have brought forward before, both to this committee and it's prevalent in the Cabinet report, is that the original output and outcomes of the original contract and project we set out for in 2010, we know can't be achieved now due to the available funding within the project making those outcomes unaffordable. So we've had to go back and look at what the best possible outcome we can get for the project with the money that's still available for the remaining through to 2035, which is, it's not an insignificant amount. It's still 1.2 billion pounds, so it's not an insignificant amount, but we have had to redress and have a look at what can be delivered within that affordability window, which is different from what the original business case set out to DfT back in 2008-9 when that business case was approved. And key to this has been getting value for money. And what we've had to balance as we go through this is that we need to ensure that in going back out to the market, that what we're putting out to offer is going to be attractive and deliverable, as it says there. It can't be something that for whatever reason, technically or otherwise, that the contractors in the industry can't deliver. And it's got to be attractive. And we do know we're operating in a market where there are a sort of saturated industry at the moment, where there are an awful lot of major projects out for procurement. So we realise we're operating in that environment, and that what we put out there has to be attractive to the industry. And we also need to ensure that the services that we need and want are being provided, and we're getting them at value for money. And that value for money test is one that not only BCC need to look at in terms of their input into the project, but also obviously DfT in terms of the money they're putting in through the PFI grant. And it also has to be, as it's put there, a structure that the government can approve. So it's still got to look, feel, and meet the requirements of a PFI in terms of a structure that does that. Hence the reason retaining the SPV and ensuring that risk transfer that is inherent in PFI contracts is maintained in order to maintain that grant, which is again a significant grant when we look at what the alternatives are. Timetable is a challenge for us. 19 months sounds like a long time from where we are at the moment. So procurement and a new contractor coming in is supposed to step in on the planned procurement timescale at the end of August 2023. 19 months away, but given where we are, it's and the nature of the project, and so the size of the project, it is a tight timeline to run on. And then just the other challenge is, as I touched on earlier, the alternative of a non-PFI structure is the alternative. And the real challenge there is that comes with the impact of no PFI grant. And whichever way we look at this, losing that grant in an alternative scenario of a non-PFI structure would result in a position where the council will be getting lesser service and lesser investment in its road in roads and highways if we default to the alternative solution of a non-PFI structure. So I'll let Clive pick it up from here in terms of some of the more detailed aspects of the procurement.
Thanks, Kevin. Right then, so in terms of the interim services contract that we currently have, just to recap where we are, we awarded that to Kears in April 2020. Amongst other things, they were challenging because of the pandemic. It was the commencement of the pandemic, so that was an issue. But the contract nevertheless did successfully commence on the 1st of April. Keir took over all of the services that are listed on the slide there, so things such as surveys and inspections, and for that what we're talking about are safety inspections of all assets, structures, etc. They also undertake reactive maintenance and incident response, so whenever there is a pothole that is reported in, they attend those matters. They also undertake routine maintenance works such as weed spraying, tree works, that kind of thing. And also, of course, during this time of year, winter maintenance, which is obviously the gritting and that kind of thing. So they also undertake point asset works such as street lighting, traffic signals, and obviously the tunnels work that they undertake as well. And there are some capital investment works that are now planned to do on the tunnels, mainly metrics to do with fire safety, etc. So some upgrades that are planned for the tunnels shortly. In terms of the way that the contract is structured, it isn't PFI, so it is quite different. It is a cost reimbursable contract. It is still with Birmingham Highways Limited, as we did with the PFI, and we intend to for the long-term procurement. And we've also got another arrangement with Tarmac, who are undertaking some significant capital investment around the network, which we'll come on to a little bit later, I'm sure. In terms of objectives, it was to stabilise the service delivery following the previous provider, Amy. Also to try and improve the culture and the behaviour during this interim period, recognising that a significant number of staff were transferred to Kier from Amy, and we needed to improve things there. I think that we have done. I think that Kier have done, generally speaking, a good job. There's more to do. It is a different environment and it is a different contract, but I genuinely do believe that they are improving matters considerably. Obviously, the most important and primary thing that we're concerned with is to make sure that the network is safe and it is available at all times, or as far as is reasonably possible. The contract has recently been extended, as we're aware, and that will match the long-term procurement timeline. So the Kier transition through to August 2023, when we fully intend to have a long-term procurement in place. So in terms of the timetable for that, we've already issued through BHL, Birmingham Highways Limited, a prior information notice in October of last year, and that was published. During the latter half of this month, subject to DFT giving us approval on Monday, which we're hopeful they will, of course, and then we will start in earnest inviting in potential bidders to participate in a dialogue. Yesterday saw a major event in Birmingham where we had a suppliers day at the Library of Birmingham. We had around 20 attendees in person at the library, and we had a further 40 or so online. And we had, it was a very positive day. We had a really good turnout and a lot of interest in the long-term procurement. So we are confident, but by no means certain, but we are confident that we will have a viable procurement and that we will have a number of tier one contractors interested in bidding for this contract. During January, the tenders are expected to be submitted. That's following all the dialogue. That's January 2023. This is quite challenging in terms of timeframes because there's a lot to go through during that period to consider all of the changes to contract and potential affordability issues, etc. We would hope to have an appointed preferred bidder subject to a full business case approval from DFT in March of that year, contract award in April, and then a mobilisation period through to a start in 1st of September. During that April to September period of 2023, there would be a demobilisation of the interim services contract into the new PFI arrangement. So the future contract, we've recognised throughout that the existing PFI contract needed and must change for obvious reasons. That recommended approach now reflects this, and that there are compromises, as Kevin referenced earlier. Some of the affordability issues were the biggest concern, and as a result, some of the specification requirements have changed, not relaxed in any way to compromise safety or reputation or anything else of that nature. So we are meeting well above statutory minimum, and we will be doing so come what may. In terms of the payment for the works and non-performance, that has been rationalised and it's been made far more simple because it was particularly difficult to implement and manage and monitor. That has changed from large numbers of performance standards to a relatively small number. And that approach is recognised in the fact that we've changed performance targets split into priority and routine requirements, with obviously the more important things in the priority and everything else being routine requirements. There will be a continuous investment through that remaining 12 years from 2023 to conclusion in 2035. And each year should and will see some capital investment on the network. We have incentivised the way in which services will be delivered through the payment structure, and we've had some good feedback so far from the market. We're expecting that to be embraced by the market and to address any reputational damage that we've had from the previous arrangements. That's basically where we're at. That's what we're looking to deliver. There is a supplementary slide here in terms of questions about where we are with the current investment programme. There is a link there, and I would encourage you to look at that to see the works that are being invested, which are considerable, and that work is ongoing and will continue now until for another 12 months. So that's where we're at. We're into interim works programme tranche 3. So that's where we're moving to next. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Clive. And I think just two things. I think obviously, Chair will circulate the slides so people can use this link straight after the meeting. And I think just finally, there's a slide just after this, Clive, which entirely up to you, Chair, if you want to leave it on the screen or not. But it just sets out again for everybody's benefit, the structure of the project and just who some of the stakeholders and entities in the project are. If that helps in any way, the sort of question session, happy to leave that up there. But otherwise, Chair, open to any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin and Clive. Yeah, very informative and a clear presentation. I think the slide there, leaving it on the screen, is helpful because each time we discuss this, I find it mind blowing, the complexity of the governance structure, and particularly for the benefit of any members of the public that are watching this. And this is how PFI operates. This is our reality. So I just need to point out, as you said at the beginning, Kevin, that this is you're in a live procurement process, so there may be some questions that you aren't able to answer, and if so, I'm sure you'll indicate. From the presentation, Clive just mentioned the provider event that you had and the good attendance. But I just wondered whether you are absolutely confident that there is going to be interest in the market, for this contract in Birmingham, given that the history of what happened, and the collapse of the AMI contract. So I just wanted you just to comment on that briefly before I bring in Councillor Huxtable.
Yeah, I think just a few things about that. Yeah, I think you're right. One of the real positives we took from yesterday was obviously the presentation we gave yesterday, which again, happy to circulate it to members. It's quite detailed, it's quite technical, but I think important to take some of the tone of that, because it was very much about looking forward. And I think the positive thing we took back from those that attended yesterday, which Clive says was 60 or 70 people from various tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 contractors. So your big boys and then the subcontractors beneath them. The real positive we took from that is that they were looking forward to. There was really no questions about or issues about what had gone before. So I think this idea of, perhaps a lot of the noise we heard around as Amy was exiting about some of the negative perceptions of the contract were put to bed. And I think that the market and the industry now genuinely know that they can deal with us deal with us and the project, as something, as a fresh start, as a reset, if you like. The changes that we've made, I think, is very important. I mean, we went into some detail with the industry yesterday on that, and I think they again were really receptive to find things like, has been publicised in some of the trade press articles. The 600 performance obligations that we previously had have now been effectively boiled down to 28 key indicators. So those sort of things start making it more attractive. And I think finally, just on that point, I think you're always, just in terms of our levels of confidence of getting interest in this, as tier 1 contractors, you're always going to be in a world where there is only potentially 3 or 4 contractors of this size and nature that would take it on as a single entity. I think part of, again, the feedback we had yesterday is that there may be others looking at this as a consortia potentially. So smaller groups, perhaps tier 2 contractors, but with consultancy support to them and that sort of thing, who would look to potentially put into the contract as well and the project as well. So I think it was positive yesterday, but the real truth is we'll find out towards the end of February, beginning of March, about what the real industry interest is in it.
That's reassuring to hear, because I think, from the point of view of our residents here, for all the councillors on in this meeting, that we went through that awful period, where residents could just see, the state of the road surfaces and pavements, just deteriorating in that sense, that Amy just weren't delivering what they were being paid to do. And I think, I'd certainly say, anecdotally, that I feel that we're getting a much better service from Kia. So the last thing we want is any sort of cliff edge or any sort of phase where we're in danger of sort of deteriorating back to what we had before. So it's good to hear that there is interest out there and that people aren't being put off Birmingham. Councillor Huxtable, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is, Kevin very helpfully did the email address for ongoing carriageway programme. It says, I've just clicked on it, it said it's updated the first week of every month, and it was last updated on the 10th of December 2021. Given that we're on the 19th of January, that doesn't entirely fill me with confidence that it is being updated the first week of every month. Either it is or it isn't, and we need to get on and update it. And on a more general point is that we all know, as councillors, as you said, the state of our roads, of pavement, the maintenance of trees. And while I would agree entirely with you that more work is being done now than under Amy in the last few have deteriorated to such an extent because of the lack of work that happened, that exponential effect on our street scene. Even more needs to be done just to keep still with the deterioration on the carriageway. And what plans do we have to do that? Because it's just not good enough to do what we were planning to do a few years ago, because the street scene has got exponentially worse. Which leads me on to my next point, and one of the main failings of, in my opinion, of the Amy contract is an up-to-date asset network. And Councillor Freeman pointed this out, and I could also give examples where relatively modern street lighting was being replaced, and elder street lighting wasn't being replaced, and it's as if they didn't know what was new and what was old, and have a proper up-to-date highways assets register. Is Kevin and the team confident that that asset register is now fully up to date, so we know exactly how old our street lights are, when the trees were last maintained, when the carriageway was last resurfaced, when the pavements were last restored across the whole of the city? Because that's got to be the starting basis for any new PFI contractor, a completely up-to-date and accurate record of all the assets that are part of the PFI, not just in terms of when they were last maintained in whatever form, but actually what we own, because as I understand it, we keep on coming across bits that should be part of the asset register, land that should be part of the asset register, which we've just discovered. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Huxtable. Over to you, Kevin, to deal with both those questions, please.
Yeah, I think there's probably three there, including the initial one from Councillor Huxtable, which, to be fair, yeah, we'll pick that up, obviously, in terms of if that hasn't been updated as it should have been the first week in January. I have had a meeting actually immediately before this one on the programme, so it may just have been waiting for that discussion. But But Councillor Huxtable, we will get that updated, and we will look to keep that updated, as it says, on the first week of every month. So my apologies for that. I think then just jumping around a little bit, because I'll probably bring Clive back in on the second one about the deterioration factor. But just on what we call the asset inventory then. So yeah, I think we'd agree the way that Amy went about a lot of things left quite a few of us mystified. Some of that was down to some information they kept on the inventory of assets that we take. Some of it was down for other reasons, as we've come across in the court cases that we were successful in. So I think what we have been able to do, and as Clive said in his half of the presentation, part of the reason for taking this the interim services period has allowed us to do is to stabilise. And some of that has been about stabilising and stabilising the inventory and cleansing the data that's in it as well. And I think that's been a very important exercise that Kears have had the opportunity to do off the back of Amy exiting. So, as you say, getting on top of things, not just street lighting, but structures, trees, and traffic signals, controllers, and that sort of thing, to ensure that we have the most accurate data available to us to be able to have a proper asset management strategy to deliver on those investment works. So, I think yes, that's in a better place than it's ever been, and certainly in a far better place than it was when Amy exited the contract. And a lot of work has been done, particularly by Kears and their staff, but also with Clive and others in the PFI team and the Highways Information team to get that inventory as accurate as possible. I think the other point, and it was an additional report separate to the one that we took on the PFI to the December 14th cabinet, we took a report on exactly the point that Councillor Huxtable's raised there about additional bits of land that become apparent that are part of the highway that we didn't know about. We internally have done again through our Highways Information team, have done a complete review of the entire highway network and pulled in many different areas that have become apparent our highway when we've gone back and looked at historic records and things that have come about through queries and comments that have come about over the period of the contract. We pulled that into one single piece of work that's GIS based on a layer on our systems. That we took a report then to Cabinet on 14th of December that looked to identified that as an issue, and also apply the funding that we need to obviously put into the project. If we're bringing additional areas of network into it, then there's revenue implications for that, which we again took as a report to Cabinet on the 14th. So I think that again is something that's given, and going back to the market interest in this and the suppliers' day yesterday, we have been able to say to them that the time we've taken over that period, they are now, as a set of contractors and potential bidders, able to bid on a far more accurate set of data than we've had previously, than we had back in 2009, and they can have a far higher level of confidence and assurance that what they're looking to bid for is an accurate representation of the network and the assets that we're going to be asking to maintain. So I think that is a really key. I thank Councillor Huxtable for raising that as an issue. The greater deterioration of surface, and particularly surfaces, and you dropped out for a small part of that, Councillor Huxtable, but I got the gist of it. And I'll let Clive come in on perhaps some of the detail of this. But I think what is recognised, hence the reason we have an issue with affordability, is that period where we didn't get any investment from Amy prior to them leaving the contract. We recognise that has caused a significant deterioration of parts of the network. And hence the reason that's why we have the part of the reason we have the affordability problem. So that has been factored into how we then take it forward in terms of what we're able to get. This goes to the heart of the comment that we're not able to achieve what we set out to get in 2009 and 2010 when we let the contract. But what we are able to achieve now is this with the money that's available. And I think it is a case of trying again to tackle that and as we said in previous the report we took to Cabinet last June, we are approaching those investment works now in a different way to ensure that we are putting the investment in the areas where we think we need it most. So we're not wholly beholden to a computer model this time in terms of generating those schemes and those conditions. We are looking at other aspects, and we have highlighted the use of complaints and petitions as a means of analysing and putting a programme together. As I've said previously, not every petition will mean that you get a scheme done, but what it will do, it will add to the picture that we can put together to put the investment back in the right places to ensure that deterioration is as much as possible, and that we're putting the investment in where it's going to get the best bang for the buck. So those roads that have the most traffic on them, for instance, is, you know, and that people travel most often is one key aspect of that, of those criteria. I don't know if Clive just wants to add any more flavour to that before Councillor Huxtable might want to come back in on that, but
yeah, I can do, Kevin. Yeah, what I would say is that we've undertaken through BHL a full resurvey of all of the carriageways and footways. So all of the paved surfaces right across the whole network in the last year. So what we do now have is an up-to-date, comprehensive condition survey, and that is going to be available in the data room to bidders to evaluate and to look through the pavement management model, which has also had a considerable amount of work done and has been audited and tested and checked considerably. You know, it's been done comprehensively, and it's been done to a very high level of detail by independent bodies to give that level of confidence to the market so that they know exactly what they're getting when they take on this network. There is no doubt for them. They will have a period where they can do due diligence. Part of the evaluation that we're looking for is that we will be looking for their strategic approach on not just how they're going to deal with that level of deterioration and what condition they're going to be able to provide to us year on year to 2035, but also how that interrelates to their strategic approach for doing routine and reactive maintenance, and to show that that is an integrated approach. So we're not just going to be evaluating the condition that they're going to be bidding back for the amount of money that's available to hit that affordability envelope, but we're also going to be evaluating the services across the piece. So whilst I can't say to you definitively that they won't bid back at a lower level because of the amount of money that's available, what I can say to you is that they will be incentivized to give us the very best possible outcome for the money that's available, and that thereby gives us value for money. So that's really the only assurance that I can offer. I think it is a strong way of doing this. It's the best way that we have available to us. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks, Clive. And I think that's very reassuring to hear that, partly because it means that we've got much more control over it ourselves, rather than being reliant on other people's assessments, or in the case of the prioritisation, on, you know, somebody else's computer algorithm. I can see that Councillor Huxtable wants to come back in. If there's a follow-up question, Tim, go ahead. And then Mike Leddy is waiting to come in. He hasn't spoken before, but go ahead, Tim.
It's a very, very quick one. Could Kevin just confirm he's got the instant message that I sent him during the meeting, please? Because it's to do with a parochial issue.
is that on Teams, Councillor Huxtable, or?
Yeah, it was sent to you directly, Kevin.
I will have a look. I'm going to say yes. If I haven't, Councillor Huxtable, I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
That's probably a matter of toggling between screens, which is difficult if you're trying to listen and answer questions, isn't it? And I appreciate the problem there. But yeah, but thanks for checking up on that, Tim. Mike, Councillor Leddy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. When the PFI was first talked about, it was the selling point was that the overall asset would be in a far better state at the conclusion of the contract than if we just plodded along as we were up until 2010. Have I got the assurance of the Assistant Director that overall each element of the asset will be in a far better position come 2035. That's number one. Number two, we talk about having to, or the assistant director has, of changing elements of the contract mid-term to make it more, should we say, a better for the bidders to come in. Now, I know that BHL has a number of shareholders, but the original shareholders also took a risk, like any business, and I'm hoping that the outstanding just over £500 million, 600 million pounds of grant from central government is not going to put at risk the people of Birmingham, and that the original shareholders in BHL need to carry some of that risk. And I don't think they have carried enough to date. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, great questions. Kevin, over to you for a response then, please.
Yeah, I think, as you say, they're both really good questions, Councillor Leddy. I think the assurance on will we be in a better state in 2035 on every individual part of the asset than we were in 2010. I think the thing we have to acknowledge there is that we'll certainly, and this does come back to the point we made earlier on what the alternatives are for us. So it does depend on what we're comparing that against. But as we stand here at the moment, the best possible outcome we can get in terms of an improved condition of all those assets is through the PFI contract. That is where we have the most funding available to us. And as we touched on earlier, the alternative of not having a PFI contract, I suppose this is the way I'll leave it, the not having a PFI contract from where we stand at the moment, we will not have as good a condition of all those assets as we would have if we didn't have a PFI contract. So it's difficult. It's difficult to compare 2010 with 2035 in terms of the condition then to the condition that will be at that point. The principle of PFI was always about a core investment period in the first 5 years across all the assets, but particularly the surfaces, that took you up to a certain level, and then you maintained that level through to hand back in 2035. One of the most, as we've been through before, one of the core reasons why we are where we are is that core investment period wasn't completed by Amy. So we never got to that level to maintain through to the end. So what we are now saying is that with all the money we have available left in the contract, which is circa 1.2 billion pounds, is we are going to use that money to the best possible extent to get the best possible outcome, so that when we get to 2035 we have the best possible set of assets. And I think that's the assurance that I can give. And I say very difficult to compare where we were in 2010 to 2035 if we acknowledge the fact that, as we've said earlier, with the affordability challenges we've got with the project, we won't be able to achieve the same outcomes and outputs that we had when we went into this in 2010. So I think that's the assurance I can give. It's still the best option for the city in terms of the money that's available, and it will still be giving us a better outcome in terms of the condition of those assets in 2035 than we would have if we did not have the PFI and that funded in place. And I think just the second point on the risk, and as we put it in terms of the investors in BHL, yeah, the important bit, as we've said as I said in the presentation, in terms of ensuring that the business case goes forward, particularly as far as the DFT is concerned, there has to be they have to be happy that the investor's role in this is still taking sufficient risk, particularly on the issue of performance delivery. And so that's something we've been going through. We've been through with them when we put the strategic outline business case in June. So we made, again, between us and BHL, we've put together a proposal that says investors will still be taking a risk on the money they've put into this, and it will still be at risk if they do not perform and do not deliver. and that will very much be at the forefront of DfT's mind as we go through those business cases. It's very much been what we've one of the key issues we've been discussing with DfT in this business case has just gone in. We understand they're content with the proposal, and it does pass that risk over to the investors in terms of ensuring the money they're putting into this is at risk of performance, and they are carrying that risk. So I think that's the important part of ensuring that, or one of the key parts of ensuring this stays as a PFI, is that risk transfer is there. And where we stand at the moment, the proposal that's being put forward in the business cases still puts that risk over to those investors.
Thanks, Kevin. We've got Councillor Freeman. Eddie's indicating he wants to come in. Eddie, over to you.
Chair, my concern is, if we do get this contract, will each ward, either one person and two persons, get a similar sort of budget? Because it seems to drift over to one side to another, where every councillor in their one and two persons wards will get an equal amount. So we all know which our roads need doing, pavements, lighting and all that, to get a fair whack of the budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Eddie. Kevin.
Yeah, I don't think, and I've been in this 6 years, I don't think there's ever been any allocation in the PFI made towards wards. I can't think of any reason why that would have been. Obviously, there are other pockets of money, particularly things like the ward minor measures, which is obviously separate to the PFI, which are allocated on a ward basis. And as you're alluding to, there 2-member wards get twice as much money as 1-member wards. But I'm not aware of any circumstances, at any point in the PFI, and I'm not that there's nothing proposed going forward in terms of where that money is allocated on a ward basis. It will be done in terms of the investment in the network, as we mentioned before. It will be done on the basis of those roads that are in the worst condition will be done first, and how we identify what's in the worst condition. Again, going back to the point we made earlier, we've changed that. We've put more of a sort of sense check and I suppose human check in on where those things are in the worst condition. But that doesn't mean that we're going to allocate on a ward by ward basis or allocate money on a ward basis. It's still going to be done very much on the basis of which roads are in the worst condition.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kevin, I don't remember there ever being, any sort of identified pot within the PFI for us individually as councillors. But I think one of the things that that's been good, under the care management is that the highway stewards have been very active. We've got an excellent highway steward who covers Bourneville and Cotteridge and is always up for doing walkabouts with members, because I think that's comes back to your point that we need a much more meaningful way of assessing what are the high priority areas, carriageways and pavements for repair. And certainly, I've been very pleased to see, the plans for resurfacing in my own ward, and also I've welcomed the access to information about that you're publishing, even though if it's not, as Tim has pointed out, perhaps not being updated as quickly as we anticipated. But I think the highway stewards, are playing a key role here.
And I think just before Councillor Freeman comes back in, Chair, just on that, I'd entirely agree with you. And obviously using the stewards as a means to inform that programme is part of the, again, assessment that we're going to use about where we're going to put the investment works on carriageways and footways in particular going forward. So I think, as I say, there's a local element to it, but it's not going to be, if you like, devolved local funding, but it will look at trying to get, obviously, that bottom up, if you like, coming from members, residents, up through the stewards and into that process.
Eddie, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just to say, when we took the AMI contract on, every councillor had a choice. They said put in six items of each ward. What you want done, which roads you want for tarmacking, lighting, or pavements. And that's what I was just wondering, if we do get an input saying, we would like so and so roads done. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Chair, in fairness to Councillor Freeman, I do understand that was the first year of the PFI.
Kevin,
before. Yeah, sorry, go on. Sorry, Chair, did you want to come in?
Any comment on that, Kevin?
Oh yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, I think to be fair, Councillor Freeman does raise a good point. My understanding is yes, in the first year of the contract, there was an ask of members effectively to inform that investment works programme through exactly the way Councillor Freeman's suggested. I think though after year one, that never took place. It went into that process that we described earlier, which is the contract mechanism, which was about using condition data through computer models to drive the program. And I think to be fair, so we're not going to go back to something that's quite as quite as overt as the first year was, which was, you know, as Councillor Freeman says, give us your 6 schemes and we'll put those on a programme. I think what we have recognised though is that it needs to pull both those things together. It needs to be informed by data in terms of condition, but then it needs to be influenced by those things that are coming either, as we said earlier, up through the highway stewards, through petitions, through complaints. It needs to be informed by that. So hopefully it'll meet the idea of this. It takes some middle ground to that. It's not influenced directly by members giving us a list of schemes, but it will be influenced and directed by those things where we know we've got problems through complaints, petitions, etc., etc. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling with between my phone and my laptop. Yeah, so thanks, Kevin, for the reply, and thanks, Eddie, for reminding us, because I'd certainly forgotten that, as you'll have seen. But I think it just points up the fact that the whole episode with Amy was just so disastrous, really. That the things that were positive that could have been followed through just didn't get followed through in that way, did they? So it's great to see that we're onto more positive territory with Kia, and particularly over the last couple of years. I'm just looking at my list of speaker requests. I've got Councillor Quinlan to come in first, and then Tim as a follow-up. So Hendrina, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I have just put my question on the chat function, but I can read it now. Yes, Kevin, please. You were saying something about putting investment in the right places. Please, could you explain this in the context of Birmingham? When you say investment in the right places, which are those right places for investment in Birmingham? For example, would you resurface in this contract? Will there be a provision to resurface roads in the inner city areas? For example, in my ward, where the roads are in such a bad condition, that what I have seen in these last 10 years had been just keep patching, and filling the potholes. To the extent I can mention Holy Road, I can mention Grove Lane, a certain part of Grove Lane, whereby it has, whenever it's patched, then the next to it is just a few weeks or months, then the pothole reappears. And
do you want me to just come back on that one, Chair?
Yes, yeah, I think Hendrina may just have dropped out, but yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point when I say right areas. Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, I think so. What we're saying about investment in the right areas is exactly that point, and you do really raise a really vital point we perhaps missed on this subject, which is part of the answer to this is, say, not doing a lot of that patching and small potholing that you saw particularly with Amy, because that was Amy's approach. Certainly in the latter years of the contract, was rather than put the investment in, it was about keeping things safe through a series of temporary repairs, which weren't particularly good, and lead, as we've said earlier, to overall to a deterioration in the network, because that capital investment, that real proper investment in repairing the roads isn't going in there. It's a temporary fix, it's a patch. So I think that moving away from that as well is key. And as I say, that's probably something we should have mentioned earlier. That's the essence of what the sort of investment strategy is going forward. I think when I say the right areas, it's not about physical whether it's one part of the city or another, or inner city versus city centre or suburbs. It's really about putting it in the right areas that requires that investment and that repair. And we mentioned earlier there's some criteria, and I could let Clive talk in infinite detail on this if we really want to. But that, so for instance, right areas might be those areas, as we said earlier, that are getting the highest traffic roads. Right areas might be footways where we know we've got high footfall, or where they're outside certain facilities and whether that might be sort of prioritising it around areas where we've got old people's facilities and we want to take slabs out because they're a tripping hazard. Putting those sort of aspects in is what we're talking about, the right areas, and getting and ultimately going back to the point about having an affordable contract, getting the best possible. It goes to Councillor Leddy's point as well, getting the best possible condition we can on the network by the time the 2035 comes around, for the money that we have available. And a lot of that will be around ensuring that permanent repairs are done in the right places, so we're not having to go back and do that sort of patched and potholed and repair that Councillor Quinnan is raising there, which is quite right to raise, and a fundamental part to an investment strategy. So that's what I mean by the right areas. It's not necessarily physical geographical areas, it's putting it where we're going to get the best bang for the buck in terms of repairing the network and ensuring that we don't have to go do those sort of temporary repairs again and again.
Yeah, if I could come back, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's just about, I'm just trying to understand, because in the past years, I have been informed that certain issues like pruning of trees in certain areas, they were actually excluded in the PFI contract. So that had been an issue. So could you explain now the exclusion of certain jobs, or in for example in Hensworth Ward, whereby certain say requesting certain road to be resurfaced, and then I'm told no, it is not part of the PFI contract. Asking for the trees to be pruned, then I'm told it's not part of the PFI contract. I'm trying to understand how these contracts work, whether you have to exclude certain areas geographically in them. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I'll just come back on that point.
Yeah.
And I think probably just a couple of things on that is, yeah, you're quite right. Not every road in the city is necessarily something that's highway, what we call highway maintainable public expense. So it may not be within the contract. There will be housing roads, there will be private roads. There may be trees, again, trees that aren't part of the highway network. But I think generally speaking, those things that we know to be roads and highways, 99 times out of 100 will be things that are included in the contract. There may be exceptions to that. There very are often exceptions to requests that we get about why certain things aren't being maintained, and the answer to that will be is that they're either private, they're housing, they're not part of the contract. So that will come about. Not everything necessarily that people think is part of the highway is highway. So I think. But with tree pruning generally, so just to be absolutely clear, tree pruning of highway trees is part of the contract. I think there's been some elements of the interim services in terms of tree maintenance that might have been taken out of that, but the tree pruning, tree maintenance of any highway trees is part of the contract.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And then I think just to round off this item, then back to Tim Huxtable, please.
Thank you, Chair. No, just to follow up from Councillor Freeman's comments and Kevin's reply. I think that my recollection was that the ask of councillors was done before the PFI started to utilise the knowledge and expertise of councillors as to where they thought the worst carriageways were, the worst pavements were, etc. in their wards. and this was fed back to the City Council Highways Department for discussions with the PFI contractor as to where to put the investment immediately, while the asset inventory, the asset condition surveys were actually being underdone. And the reason I believe that to be the case is that I think as councillors, and I realise that only I think Councillor Leddy, Councillor Freeman and myself were councillors at the time, the request came from Councillor Gregory. So that would have dated it between 2008 and 2010. So just before the PFI contract actually came into force.
Yeah, that sounds right. As I say, and before my time in terms of looking after the contractors, and before Clive's as well. So, but that's my sort of recollection and understanding. Say would make absolute sense of the timing with that, Councillor Huxtable, because as you say, the first year's investment programme wouldn't have been clear until the service provider had got in and done that work. So I suppose that was the ask, that was seen as the best way of driving that programme in the first year. But as I say, beyond that, then it fell into the contract specification. So yeah, that makes absolute sense on how it was carried out in the first year.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think it's good, to fill in the sort of institutional memory there, because as you say, a number of us were not working for or representing wards on the council at that stage, the years immediately before the inception of this contract. Okay, then, we're just in view of the time, we're going to say thanks to Kevin and Clive, for updating us on the negotiations. Doubtless we will come back to this, and if anyone has any more detailed questions or things that are about their own ward, I'm sure Kevin and his team will be happy to deal with that offline, as it were. And so thanks very much, yes, and see you again probably in the not too distant future. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Clive.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, we've just got a couple of standing items to finish off the agenda. On the work programme, that's been circulated with our agenda papers along with the forward plan of decisions. So in February, we've got the portfolio members update, and then other things come up in March, like the flood risk report. So are there any comments on the work programme initially?
None for me.
Okay, then, because I wanted to move on, because under AOB, I wanted to raise two things. The first is that you will remember from last Tuesday that there was a motion from our Liberal Democrat colleagues on safety outside schools, traffic management, and measures around schools, and that included a requirement that the cabinet member gives a twice yearly update to both ourselves as Sustainability and Transport Committee and also the Education and Culture Committee on what's being done to promote safety outside schools. So my view on that is that that we should ask the cabinet member to integrate that into his regular updates to us as a committee, and doubtless the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee will make their own plans. But I think it's something that based on our previous discussions, all the members of the committee are interested in this anyway, and we've been asked by full council to do it. So that's the proposal. So that's the first thing that I wanted to mention. And then obviously we've had the announcement today that the government intends to lift the Plan B measures as of the end of next week, which obviously has an impact on us and in terms of how we organise the meetings. So for February, as I said, we're due to have the portfolio update with the cabinet member, Councillor Zaffer. So I just wanted to sort of take people's views about how they want to hold the meeting. Do you want to have an in-person meeting, which would now be in Committee Room C of Margaret Street? That's my understanding. Or do you want to have an informal Teams meeting? I think just on the practicalities in Committee Room C of Margaret Street, my understanding would be the members of the committee plus the cabinet member, and then any other officers would just be one by one. Can Kerry or Basima confirm that in terms of the practical arrangements?
Yes, Chair. So what it could actually mean is that the cabinet member could present on the screen. It would be all members of the committee who have a vote and need to be present for the meeting to be quorate, plus any support staff by way of myself or Basima, And then anybody, including the cabinet member, any officers who are presenting, could present remotely.
I see, and we're confident that the IT works in that room and that there's heating.
Yes, Chair.
So I'm asking rhetorical questions, but they're not entirely rhetorical because we all know what the heating situation is like in the BMI big room that we've been using. Councillor Johnson White, you're raised your hand, so please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just for my benefit, could you just tell me what the date is for the February meeting? I just don't appear to have it in my diary.
It's the 16th.
16th. Thank you.
16th of February.
Yes.
Cheers. Many thanks.
Thank you. Anyone got any comments or observations that they want to make about going back to holding an in-person meeting?
But just for the record, I'm happy either way. Whichever everybody else decides, I'll go with either. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, thanks for setting the ball rolling, because it's difficult to make a decision if people don't tell me what their thinking is.
From my perspective, I would prefer a in-person meeting, if only because that then makes the meeting a formal meeting.
Okay, yeah, yes, I'm hearing you, Tim. Yeah. Anyone else?
Being a member of the Licensing and Public Protection Chair, we have to have in-person meetings, so it doesn't bother me.
Normally, Chair, it doesn't bother me either way.
That's fine then. Well, it sounds like we should have an in-person meeting. I suppose my anxieties are that that then we are asking people to make their way to the meeting into the centre of Birmingham. Some people will come on public transport where there will now no longer be a requirement to wear masks. I mean, obviously we hope that people will have some care and concern for themselves and their fellow citizens and continue wearing masks in public transport. But I do think that there is obviously, when we're having the discussion with Councillor Zaffer, there is a benefit in doing that face to face, because it wonderful as Microsoft Teams is as a platform, it does actually inhibit slightly that flow of discussion, doesn't it? So I suggest we go ahead then with an in-person meeting and see how it goes, really. But if people are reluctant to attend, then I absolutely understand that, because as somebody who's dependent on public transport on my bike, I have got some anxieties about what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. But I think then we'll move to have an in-person meeting in February and take it from there. So and just want to know that I'm doing that with everyone's consent who's here today.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay then. Are there any other issues that anyone wants to raise now under any other business or urgent items of business?
Just me, Chair. I'm just still concerned about a few lamp columns lights are still on during all the day. So I don't know if the inspectors have been out to check them yet. A bit on the Inglesby Way down at off Longfellow, Licky Road, Bitch Green Lane, and several other places where lights are permanently on now, and some of them are new lights.
Right, that's interesting, because on the lighting on the Macefield estate, I hadn't been aware of that. Certainly, no one's alerted me to it, but I would be concerned if that's happening. But I'm sure we can ask Basima to just drop Kevin an email and follow that up, because I know that you've asked that before, either last meeting or the one before. So yes, we can follow that up. Okay, then if there's no other A or B items, then as it's an informal meeting, I don't think I have to ask the bit about authority to act. So I'll just wish everybody a good rest of the day, and thanks for your participation today. And we'll see you in Margaret Street in February then. If I could just ask Basima and Kerry to just stay on the call briefly. But thanks everybody else, and bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.